We'll just go back over a couple of the things we looked at last week, and then we'll sort of get straight into the program tonight in terms of doing some drawing, start to look at some of the drawing modifying tools, and hopefully it'll sort of give you a chance to sort of click on some of the familiar icons that we looked at last week, and also start using some of your navigational tools that we looked at. So probably the first thing would just be to go back over that user interface, so you're familiar with that. So there is in part of the short exercises, I believe, there's a little quiz there that sort of shows you again a snippet of the screen. So if you go to the short exercises down your content side there, you should find, once you scroll through, you'll see a little snippet of that user interface that we looked at last week. And if you go down to the quiz and click on the quiz section, we just say preview quiz or start quiz now. And what you need to do is just have a look at that little version of that snip of the interface, and then all these little answers down the bottom just need to be dragged into the appropriate box. So if you have a go at that now, so in the short exercises you'll see that quiz. So you just have to follow where that sort of number 1 is again, which was this bit here. So that number 1 is going to be this one here, which is the quick access toolbar. So you place that up and you'll see a little halo sort of go around the box, and just drop it in there. Number 2 down here, status bar, drop that in. So see if you can remember some of them and have a go. You get multiple attempts, so don't worry, panic if you get them wrong. Just do it now to sort of see how well you remember those sorts of things. And then if you don't get it right within a few attempts, you'll have a go next week once you've studied up on what they're called. Because remember, this is what the terminology that I'm using when I'm sort of telling you where things are. Thank you. So let's get on with having a look at this program. So we can minimize that or slide it onto your second screen now. We're just going to open Revit up, and tonight we're going to open up, so hit your Windows key, start typing Revit in, and you'll see the 2019 desktop app. So remember not to open the viewer, just the Revit 2019. And what we'll start to look at tonight is some of the drawing tools. So we'll actually be opening a architectural template. That's the project we'll start with, so a blank template ready for us to start drawing in. So once it opens up, we'll go over to the Open tab over here. Sorry, we'll go to the New tab, so not Open, we go New. And the template file that we're looking for, if we drop that down, is the architectural template. And we'll just keep project tick there. So this allows us to create the template. It's going to become a project file, and we'll say OK. And it'll open up looking like that. Now when you install your software at home, this would be the first thing that you check. One of your templates are there. So if you ever open up didn't mean to do that. Let's have another look at that. If you ever open up Revit 2019 when you first install, just to do a couple of checks, the first thing that you'll be looking for is that you've got these templates actually loaded in, and so part of what it looks for when you've got your language setting to English, is what region you're in. So when you go to new, if you don't have all these templates in here, something's gone wrong in the install. So there is a way to do it afterwards, but that'll be the first indication. Okay, they're not there. I need to make sure they're there. Shoot me an email. I can send you a link on how to fix those. Architectural template. When we go into this one, the second check is then just to see what sort of if you've got imperial or metric version, to make sure you got the right version. So we want metric. So when we start to look at the first thing in terms of the scale bar, that'll be the second check you can do. So if that doesn't say 1 is to 100, it'll look a little bit different if it's metric. That might be the first check. The second thing is to sort of start to draw, which I'll show you today, and you'll be able to see how it's actually drawing and dimensioning, etc. They'll pick up pretty quick if it's the wrong version. So we're going to be looking at drawing some information into this middle of the window. Now remember in week 1 probably and week 2, I touched on this drawing area. North is always up by default, south is always down. So if you remember that, when you start drawing, you'll draw the northern face of your building up the top end and the southern face down to the south. Then you don't have to worry about halfway through your project trying to rotate it to orientate the building correctly. The other reason you're given these elevation markers, so one, it's actually putting these views down here in the project browser for us. So when they're placed in there in the template, that's actually giving us these names or these views down here in the project browser. It also gives us a space to actually know, in all of this model space here, where should I start drawing? Okay, so we're going to try to keep whatever we draw within these markers in here. So if we draw something outside the markers, it'll be behind the camera, so you won't see it in your views. That's what it'll sort of be. Sometimes you might go to a northern elevation and you go, I've got nothing. Have a look where you've started drawing. If you started drawing it up here behind where the arrow is pointing, it's behind the camera in essence. So we're going to start to try to draw everything in here, okay? I say that a few times because everyone makes mistakes when they first start drawing, and you know, we don't quite know how big things are when we start drawing, so some of you may find you have things tonight over to the side just because you're not used to the scale. So we're looking at drawing a couple of lines tonight. We're not going to be sort of starting to draw too many 3D objects. The 3D objects that we looked at in the example file last week were visible across every view. 2D elements are visible just in the view that we draw it in. So let's just draw in the ground floor plan by default where it is. And we're just going to start sort of drawing some lines in here. So along the top of your ribbon, you'll see that there's a whole series of tabs. And what we want to do is actually go into the Annotate tab. And within the Annotate tab, we've got a Detail panel, sort of in the middle there. Now in this Detail panel, this is all 2D elements that we draw in. So Revit can be used for 2D drawing and 3D drawing. And part of what we do in a 3D model is draw some 2D elements that might only be required in a certain view of the 3D element. So that's what we'll start with, is sort of drawing some detailed lines, because all your commands will be used the same if we're drawing with 3D or 2D elements, so it just keeps it a bit more simple. So we're going to click on the Detail Line button, and the keyboard shortcut for that detail line is DL, Detail Line. Now if you hover over the Detail Line button, you'll see that it gives you a little bit of a description, and there's something in brackets after the Detail Line, DL. So that's where all the shortcuts are there. So you start to get used to them. When you hover over buttons, you can see, oh, DL, I'll remember that. I'll try to remember that, okay? So it tells you as well, it's like a little tutorial when you go over it, creates view-specific lines. So view-specific lines, what did we think about last week when we looked at all the different views when we tiled them out, they all had a view control bar, didn't they? So whatever we changed in each view was going to change specifically for that view. So detail lines, it says creates view specific lines. So if we put a line in this ground floor plan that we're working on here, it's view specific. It's not going to be in our 3D model. It's not going to be, well, it's going to be in the ground floor of our 3D model, but it's not going to be in our level 1 or level 2, our elevations, view specific. We can copy them over to other views as well, but where we draw a detail line is literally the only place it's visible in the first instance. So if we click on the detail line button or type DL if you want to start getting into some shortcuts, you'll see that we've got the whole ribbon changes to the modify version of the ribbon. And this all comes up because it knows we're going to draw a line, and the next thing we probably want to do is how do we want to draw the line? What type of line do we want to draw? And do we need to move things, copy things, etc. So that all those sort of modify things come up as a panel there as well. And the other thing that you would notice is now we've got this green sort of bar across the bottom. That's the options bar. So when we had a look at the interface, there was a part of it called the options bar. So when we're coming to draw a line, we've got options for how we draw those lines, and that's what they are there. Okay, so there's a series of tick boxes, etc. Now, mine comes up a bit weird, I don't know why, but it cuts out that part of the end. So that word there that's ticked should be chain, not chair. Yours probably says chain. For some reason mine's cut half the N in, so it looks like chair. So the word chain and why it's ticked means that when we draw the line, if we draw from one point to the end point, it's ready to start drawing again. It's the lines connected as though a piece of chain would be. You don't have to press start again and finish. Okay, so that'll become a bit more evident as we start drawing. The offset is how far away from the cursor that we want to actually draw the line. Usually if there's no reference there, we'd keep it as 0. But up here in the actual drawing panel, we've got a draw section and a line style section. The drawing tools here are how do we want to start the line? So the first one that's depressed, you can see it's got a blue button. That means that that's pressed down, is literally a line, pick the start point and where the end point is. So we click to start, click to finish, and however we drag our cursor is the direction of where that line's going to be. The next one is a rectangle, which means if we click the top and then the bottom, it's actually going to draw a rectangle. So both opposite corners of that rectangle. And so forth to other sorts of drawing tools. The line styles are what types of lines we want to actually use as we're drawing. So at the moment, thin lines is picked by default. So you can see there's lots and lots of different line types set up as part of this architectural template, and we can add to those and create more line styles as we go and the more you learn. So some templates will have way more line styles, some might have quite a few less. And they might be described as different pen weights, because that's where lines actually came from. When we used to draw with pens, it would be a thickness of a pen, a 0.5, 0.25, whatever it was that we were drawing. So every line that we drew had a different thickness that represented a different material in that drawing, and that still applies here. Now when we draw by default in this area here, one of the buttons that's clicked by default on mine, and it probably is on yours, in the quick access toolbar, can everyone identify that there's a little blue button pressed, or isn't there on yours? Is that pressed? It was just white. Okay, yeah. So that little button, if you click on that button, it should go blue. My cursor's just off to the side, but that little one that's got the little lines, that's known as the line or thin lines. So it's either thin lines or thick lines. So the program has the ability to turn everything to thin lines, so it looks like it's all thin when we're drawing it, but when we print or send it to a PDF to plot it, the true line styles of what we've used will actually show. So by toggling this button on or off, or TLTL, thick lines or thin lines, short keyboard shortcut, shows you whether they're thick or thin. Okay, so we'll have a look at what that does relatively soon as we start drawing some lines. So it doesn't matter what you've got pressed to start with there. If yours is on thin lines or thick lines, it won't really matter. But we're just going to do one line, so that we're going to use the create line using a straight line and keep it as thin lines. And just click your cursor somewhere in that middle space and we'll drag it straight down and type in 5,000, enter, and you'll notice that you've drawn a line straight down your screen, but your cursor, as you move it around now, you can see it's ready to draw at the end point of the next line. So if we bring our cursor over to the right hand side, straight across, you'll notice that it snaps, and if you hold it there, it'll say horizontal. Let's type another 5,000 and enter. And go back up 5,000, straight up. Now you don't have to type the 5,000 this time. Once you get close to the end point of or where you started this line, it'll actually give you a little dotted line and say I'm intersecting that line there. So you can just click there, or you can type in the 5,000. So that's in millimeters, so it's equivalent to 5 meters. And then we'll go back over and we'll snap on the original point. So if you zoom in a little bit, use your cursor, zoom your cursor over the place that you want to zoom and use your scroll wheel to zoom in a bit, you'll see that it comes back and you get a little snap end point. So does everyone find when they got to the end they get a little pink square? That's known as a snap icon. So that snap icon means it's hitting the end point. Same in AutoCAD, you get endpoint snaps, and we can just click there, so we know it's quite accurate. So now everyone's got a square, zoom in and out, so you've got it in the center of your screen somewhere, using your scroll wheel, and click on the thick line, thin lines, and see if you can see anything change. Anything changing? Yeah? So the thin lines is just very, very thin. The thick lines, you can see it's obviously a bit more true to what it is. So let's now go and draw another rectangle or another square or something. You choose what you want to do. We'll go to back to the annotate detail line button, and we could just pick the rectangle tool this time rather than the line tool, so the little icon next to it. But let's choose the thick line style. So drop that down. It's actually called wide line. And this time I'll just click there, drag across and click there. So we don't have to put anything accurate. We've got something that's got some dimensions now on our screen. So if I have thin lines on, they all look the same. If I toggle TL, the shortcut, you can now see the difference between those two line types. Okay, so one's thick line, thin line. Now, what we usually do is work in thin lines when we're modelling, because when I'm drawing with thicker lines, especially walls and things like that, if I've got some thick lines, it actually looks like they're touching on that corner there. If I change it to thin lines, it's very obvious that it's not connected. So that's what the thin line option on the screen is for, so that we can draw in a bit more detail. We haven't got these big thick things in front of corners and that sort of thing. So just a visual aid on the screen. So what you have to remember about that thick line, thin line is most of the time we want to be drawing in thin line, but at some stage we're going to turn thick lines on because we want to see what it's actually going to print like and what it's true to most other viewers after we finish sketching and drawing things. Because as soon as we print something to a sheet, if we've got all thick lines that just are way too thick, it'll look really blurry. You might think, I've got to change my line styles a bit. Okay, so that's what the thick line, thin line. So as we start drawing in the next, this session and coming sessions that I'm coming around, I might come around and say to you, turn thin lines on, because I might notice that you're drawing in thick lines, which makes it a bit more difficult to see how accurate you are. So it's just TL to toggle between the two. So that's probably your first shortcut that you're going to start to get used to, TL, and you'll see it on the screen change in front of you if you're thick or thin. Okay. So just to give you an idea of, I suppose, all those line weights, we've looked at thin lines and wide lines in terms of what we picked there. If you go into the Manage tab, go along the top and go to your Manage tab, you'll see there's a little spanner icon that's additional settings. And in here, there's an option that shows us all the line weights. So if you click on line weights, you can start to see down the side here, there's actually 1 to 16. They're all the different weights of numbers, and how they're represented in actual size, depending on their scale, is along here. If we cancel out of that and go back into additional settings and say line styles, if we expand the category lines, these are all the lines that were given to us in that drop down, and we chose thin lines and wide lines, and you'll notice that the first projection number next to thin lines is 1 and wide is 5. So 1 is the thinnest, wide is only about a third of the way through how thick you could get a line type, because remember 16 was the highest one. So you can imagine now on our screen, if we've had to use something that was about 16, how fat that would be on our screen. In actual fact, if I change this wide line, don't do it to yours, but if I change that down to 16 and say apply and OK, there it is there. So, there's reasons why you might use thicker lines, but we tend to not go right down to, teenage sort of numbers. Those double digits are just way too fat. Because if I printed this on a piece of paper, it would take up half the ink out of the printer. So that just starts to introduce you to some of the weights and things that we're going to sort of be using and thinking about. So let's keep drawing here, and let's delete these lines. Now, one of the ways that we can select items is to click the mouse at the top left of your objects, away from your objects, and so left click and just drag, and you should see a rectangle. Drag right down so that you've got all of your sketch drawings that we've done so far totally enclosed in that rectangle. And what you'll notice is as you enclose items, singular lines, they're turning blue. And that means they're selected. So if they're not blue, they're not selected. So now they're all selected, and I can let the cursor go, and they're all blue, meaning they're selected. So I could press delete and they'll all disappear. If we want to select items, but not all of the items, depending on which way you want to go. So this way would be quite good if I just wanted to delete that box. I could just select that, even though the rectangle was overlaying that other rectangle, it's not enclosed. But if we go from right to left, the opposite way, you'll notice that that window is a dashed line. Now when we use the dashed line going back the other way, anything that I touch is selected. It doesn't have to be fully enclosed in that window, okay? So that's sort of known as our selection window. So we can do a selection window either way depending on what we want to select. So if I wanted to just delete these two lines here, the quickest way would be to do right to left, just touching those like that. There they are, press delete. If I wanted to do the whole lot, either way, right or left will do it. But notice how if I did this way and I touched this section marker, it's now selected as well. So if I don't want that one included, that way is a better option. Okay, so there's some reason for using one and not the other. That's why there's two commands there. So we just want to delete all those lines. So we'll go back to the annotate tab and detail lines. And this time we'll just still look at just the original line tool, the default one. So just the line from point to point. And this time we want to click once to start and then drag your cursor to the right. Now, when you've clicked once before you've done anything, if you have a little look down at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, remember what that area was called? Status bar. So that's giving you some prompts what to do next. So mine says enter line endpoint, okay? And if I hover my cursor across the screen to the right, it actually now says horizontal in that status bar. It's telling me my cursor is going horizontal. So you've got little prompts happening everywhere that help you with your drawing. So I mentioned, I think last week, it's a bit like learning to drive a car. All these other things to look at, and while you're drawing, there's lots of things, and eventually you look at them without realizing. It's a bit like someone, you look at your watch and you see the time, and then you look at about 5 minutes later. So I did look at it before. Yeah, that's right. It was, whatever time it is. You sort of do things without thinking about it. Now, what you will notice when you're sliding to the right here before we've clicked our second point is a whole series of numbers coming up. So the main numbers, if we're horizontal, are the distance that we're dragging that line. And so we can use those numbers to say, oh, that's all I want. I don't have to type a number in. If I only wanted 6.3 meters, I could just click the cursor and it would be there. But if I said, actually, I want something a bit more accurate, I want 9,250, it's going to be much easier for me to just type those numbers in. So 9,250, 9,250, and enter, and it's given me a line length of 9,250. Okay. The other sort of things that we're seeing off the cursor here is this angle. So it's giving us a bit of a prompt of if we wanted to draw a 45-degree line off that horizontal line.
Just a question about your reference line. Why is that shown like our line, the horizontal lines, too long for us? It's useful.
Why?
This reference line here, we are having this long line, but regarding yours, it's like a short one. So we have this long line here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. How do you set that?
Oh, this. So the question was that my line, this little reference line from where the point was, this little one here that's giving that dimension is much shorter than yours. Is it? Yours appears like it sticks out a bit?
Yeah.
I don't know. There's lots to do with this computer that I can't explain, like that word chair. I don't know how the graphics card in this machine just cuts off that half an N. Yeah, it's a bit weird. And what you'll notice with this computer is some of my icons will actually look different from time to time. So my buttons tend to change to slightly different split buttons of that. And I've asked IT to sort of try to make it exactly the same. Yep, we've done it, same install. All of the lecturer computers seem to have some slightly more bizarre sort of idiosyncrasies that happen. But that doesn't really matter in terms of how long that reference line is. What we're drawing matters. So yeah, so we get some little prompts with Revit is what I'm sort of trying to explain, I suppose. So depending on where we want to draw, if we want to sort of, draw something straight down, we can see that that's giving us that it is 90 degrees. If I hold my cursor there long enough, it's telling me it's coming down vertically on the screen. So straight away I know, okay, that's what I wanted. If it said 91 degrees, I'd think, oh, I'm off axis. I don't want it to be off that 90 degree. So we can draw a series of lines, and again it's just clicking for the next point. If we turn off the chain and start clicking, you'll notice that it breaks when it ends off the point. So that is just point to point, and then we've got to start drawing somewhere else or find the end point again. So that's why chain's quite handy, and it's usually on by default. Now when we are drawing lines using the chain, if we want to draw one line and then we do want to break the chain, it's just escape once will actually just drop the cursor off the end, so it breaks the chain, but we're still ready to draw another line. We haven't got out of the command completely. So one escape breaks that chain, and then we're ready to start drawing again. And it's still in a chain though, but we're just ready to draw again. So it's dropped it off that sort of end point, I suppose. If we want to completely get out of the command completely, it's two escapes. So escape breaks the chain, and another one gets you out of the drawing of the line command. Okay. So in essence, two escapes gets us back to just the plain cursor on the screen. The same command is here as a button. It's called the modify button. I never use that modify button. I just hit escape twice all the time. It's exactly the same thing. Okay, and I tend not to use it in class and say hit your modify button, because there's a whole modify tab, and it gets quite confusing to sort of say modify button or modify tab. Okay, so I tend not to use that modify button. I just say hit escape a couple of times, and that gets you out of that command. Okay. So draw a few more lines, play around with some of those line types. We'll go through, we'll have a quick look at the other sorts of lines as well. But while I'm talking, just go through. So the line types: rectangular, corner to corner, draws your square. Don't tend to use the polygons too often. Two different types of polygons, just depending on how they're measured, whether they're measured from the center of the polygon or the outer points of the polygon. Sort of shows you that if you hover over them. Circle, use that one occasionally to draw columns or rainwater tanks, sketch things like that. The curved lines, we've got one that's a start-end radius. So what that means is the first point that you pick is the start of the line. The second point is going to be the end of the arc, and then in this last point you click is how far you want it curving. So that's the middle sort of bit. So you're sort of flexing that to sort of have a look at the degrees or the distance out from. The next one is center end arc, which is sketching from a center point around like the circumference. And then we've got a couple like tangent end arcs and fillet arcs, which help us to sort of trim corners and things in a curved fashion. spline lines. Spline is if we want to create something quite curvy and organic, I suppose. So it's like you're drawing a normal pick line, but you can just, every time you click a point, it adds a bendy spot in your line. So if I just did it along a straight line here, you can see everywhere I click adds a loop. And then once you've done that sort of thing, you can click on it, you can see all the points, and you can actually start to flex those or bend them around to get your lines to look a little bit more organic. So something like that. We've got the oval or ellipse tool there. We've also got a partial ellipse, which is just half of an ellipse. And the last little icon is pick lines. That's that green line tool. And what the green line tool allows us to do is actually use an existing line to as the trace, I suppose, or to copy it. So if I go pick lines and I click on this, some of these lines, it actually allows you to sort of pick different lines. So it's a very handy tool for when we can actually bring in CAD drawings. So we can bring in other 2D drawings, and we can actually pick lines as walls. When we start drawing in 3D, we'll do an exercise that is that. So we'll bring in a 2D plan, and we'll click on the lines around the outside, and they'll become 3D building elements. So a really quick way, rather than have to pick the end points and trace around, we're literally just hitting it, and it follows the whole wall length in a 3D sense. So if I just demonstrate that quickly with some of these lines using a wall, I can pick that line. Oops. Using the pick line tool, I can pick that, and it's creating walls. I can use that circle, and that's actually a wall that I've drawn there. So if I look at that in 3D, there's those two walls that I just drew in 3D. Notice you can't see the lines because they're only in that one view. Remember, the detail lines are view specific. So there they all are there. Okay. So who's got a whole heap of different sketchy stuff on their screen like me? Hopefully everyone. So to clear this screen now, what I'm going to do is use my window crossing tool. So I'm going to cross that window right across everything on the screen. However, if you have a look at what I've selected, I've actually selected all these elevation markers up this end as well. It was quite hard for me not to get some of those items in and get the outside of these ones. I could have come in through this way and done like that, but quite a quick way is just to select everything. Okay. Now, I don't want to delete my elevation markers and my section marker, but I've selected them. So I've got a couple of options here. To deselect something, I can hold the shift button down, and notice next to the cursor becomes a minus sign, and then I can actually use the same window crossing and deselect it. It takes it out of the selection. And the same thing applies to the control button. If I hold control down, you'll notice next to your cursor is a plus sign. So if I want to add something to my selection, I can add it to the selection. So this is just a way to sort of start to show you some ways we can select and deselect items as well. And it'll be any type of item you can select and deselect. So when we use that window crossing, it might not be perfect. We might say, well, it's grabbed everything, but I want a couple of things less. We can easily take those things out, rather than have to sort of go through and go, well, I only want this one, and I've got, oh no, I've just hit something I don't want, do it again, do it again. It's just a little shift, hold the minus and deselect something, maybe like that, okay? The other thing that we can do when we're doing that is if everyone just selects everything on their screen now, so zoom out a bit and just make sure you get all of those level markers as well, everything on your screen. So everything should be blue. Can everyone see there's a filter tool straight up the top of your ribbon now? Click on that filter, you'll see it's actually now categorized everything that you've selected. So what's been selected now, mine says 34 items in total. So that's including the lines, the 5 views, and I've got a couple of walls that I drew in mine. So if I said, actually, I only want to delete the lines that I've drawn, I could say check none and just tick the lines and apply an OK. And now the only thing that's selected on that window is the line. So if that's what I want to delete, I can hit delete and they're the only things that go. So that filter tool is a really handy combination of crossing windows, etc., because you can filter everything out. Okay, so depending on what we're sort of trying to get rid of on our screen, it might work one way and not the other. So if you had a model and you wanted to delete 2 windows, you wouldn't select the whole model and then try to filter it out because you might have 10 windows in your model. So that's not going to work. That would be more like select one window, hold your control down to add plus, and select the second window and delete those 2. Okay, so there's lots of different ways you'll find work better for certain things. Okay, and we're just touching on them all tonight. Don't let your brain explode. I know we're covering a fair bit of stuff just with these basic lines. Any questions about anything so far? No? So if we've deleted all our lines, let's go in and start to have a little look at drawing a couple of other lines and looking at some of the modify tools as well. So we'll go back to our annotate tab and our detail lines. I'll just use medium lines this time. And I've still got chain selected there. Now this time we might draw a rectangle shape, and let's make it 12 meters across and 14 meters down. Okay, so rectangle with those dimensions. So click to start, drag your cursor over to the right, 12 meters. Now you can type in Revit 12M if you don't want to put all the zeros on, or 12,000 in millimeters. So 12 meters along. Enter. Oops, that's not 12 meters. And what did I say? 14 down. And let's create a couple of other singular lines off to the side somewhere that are between about 12 and 14 meters. Something like that. And then maybe a couple sort of down. So hit escape a couple of times once you've done that.
When I choose the rectangle and then I type, doesn't type.
Oh no, the rectangle is just approximate, yeah. So just do a single line, 12 down to 14 and then back around, yeah. So with these sort of series of lines now drawn, notice that I've hit escape a couple of times, so I'm not in any command, I've just got the normal cursor. If I select any one of those lines, the modify ribbon comes up. So notice at the moment it's still in the annotate ribbon. As soon as I just select one line by left mousing on one, clicking it, the modify ribbon comes up because it knows, okay, maybe we want to change something to do with this line. Okay, and when we're talking about these lines, everything that we're doing now applies to when we're drawing walls, because Revit draws walls in the same sense, which we'll move on to tonight as well. So I've clicked this line and it's sort of giving me a heap of dimensions there. It's showing me the distance from the end point to this end point, it's showing me the length of that line, and it's also showing me from that end to that end. Don't worry too much about those at this stage, they're just showing some quick references, any close points, so you've got a bit of an idea of scale and proportion in your drawing. But if I want to start to modify things, we've got all these tools here in terms of modifying the drawing. So one of the first ones that is quite a handy thing to understand is the trimming and extending the corners. So which of these couple along here? Actually, to keep it a bit simple, I might just start along the top and go along that way. So let's have a look at this first one here, Align tool. So the Align tool is very useful. Again, AL is the shortcut. So you can see in brackets there. And Align allows me to line up things in my drawing. So if I wanted to have this line on my drawing at the same height as that one, I could click on one of them, I get my modify commands up, I hit the Align tool, and I click on the line that I want to reference. So if I say that's where I want to align this one, I click that one first, and you'll notice it's got this little blue reference, and then I can click on that one and it'll drop it down to that line. Okay, so very handy when we're drawing architectural buildings because most things line up. Okay, so we've got boundaries, we've got setbacks, so we need things to be the same setback on those boundaries. We've got top plates that have roof pitches, pitching on them that we want to line up to make the roof a little bit less complex, etc. So, Align tool also comes with an option bar, and one of the options is multiple alignments. So if we wanted, 5 or 6 things to line up to this, we could hit the multiple box, tick multiple, and we could say that one is going to be what we want to line up with, and I could pick that one and that one. I could even pick my section line if I wanted to. Okay, so it just allows us to pick multiple. Whether we turn it on or not is going to be, I'll be up to what you're drawing. So now I've got sort of 3 lines all buried under each other in here. I'll just move some of them out. So a line will do horizontal, vertical, depending on what reference you pick. The next little modify command that's along there is offset. So the offset creates a copy of what it is and places it at a specified distance away. So if I said I wanted to offset this line, I could hit the offset, and I've got numerical or graphical. I'm going to say numerical by default, and by default it's 1 meter, and the tick is saying it wants to be a copy. So if I hover over that line now, you'll see a little blue line either at the top or the bottom, depending on where you hold your cursor, and that's showing me where the next copied line is going to be offset. So if I click there, there it is. Okay. If I unticked copy, it would actually just be moving it up to that position. So if we untick copy and hover over it, you'll see it just jump up by 1 meter. So depending on what we want to do there, we can change that distance. Offset. If we drop down now to the first one on the second row, that's the move tool. So the move tool allows us to pick an item and then move it to a specific point. So if we select a line and pick move, you'll notice that it sort of puts a little dashed box around it. And the next thing that we're getting prompted in our status bar is enter a move start point. So click to enter a move. So where do we want to move it from? Whereabouts on this line do I want to hold it? And that's going to be depending on what we're moving it to. Am I wanting the center of it to be moved to something? Am I wanting it to be from the end point that's moving it from somewhere? So it doesn't really matter at this stage, but it gives us lots of options. So it's the grab, where am I grabbing that with my cursor? So let's just grab it in the middle, and we're going to it's going to be on our cursor now, and we can drop it somewhere, or we can move it straight up and then type a distance if we want it something quite specific. But notice that in your option bar, you've got some other options for the move tool now. So we've got constrained, disjoin, and we've also got a multiple there. So constrain means that it only allows us to move it vertical or horizontally. So it won't move off on an angle even if my cursor moves off on an angle. So that becomes quite a handy tool when we're moving something in a building, because usually we say, actually I just need to move it 2 meters that way, but I don't necessarily want it on an angle. So it might be columns in a building. They all line up. We're going to just move them or constrain them so they're actually moving along the same line. So I don't have to worry about them moving and then checking that they're aligned by using the align tool afterwards. And the disjoin button, or click there, is if we've got a wall that's connected to, a rectangular building, we're going to move something. If we don't want the other walls to keep stretching and we want it actually disjointed, so we're going to move the wall away from the building, that's what that'll do. It'll disconnect that wall and allow it to go to a new position. So that's the move tool. The other way we can move items, I've just hit escape a couple of times to get out of that command, is to actually click on a line, and you'll notice if I've just left click, I've actually just grabbed that line by my cursor and the move tool is actually working. So you can click and just do an accidental drag and move. So it is a bit unpredictable sometimes, that tool. I don't really like it. I like to be able to, I wish it didn't do that. You can turn it off down here in your select buttons. So down the very right hand corner of your screen, there's a series of other little buttons. Down here, little icons. And one of them has like a cursor with a move symbol, and it allows you to turn off drag elements on selection, so you can't drag it when you select it accidentally. So a way to avoid that sort of stuff happening, because you can imagine if you're in a 3D model and you went to use your select window, but you dragged along a floor of the building, it might accidentally grab it and start moving it. Happens a fair bit. So because the floor is, the whole plane of what you're selecting. We can change some of these, the way things are selected in the select buttons, and we can also pin items so that they can't be moved unless they're unpinned. So to pin items, we've got these two little pin tools. One is a pin and one is unpin. Everyone see those two icons in the modifier? So if we didn't want this rectangle here, or mine, I could select the whole thing and pin it. You'll notice it's got 4 pins there now. So that doesn't matter if I grab the move button now, or selected the whole thing and then grab the move tool, it would let me move it and then give me a warning and say can't move pinned items. Oh, okay, I have to cancel it. Okay, so there's different modified tools that are sort of there to stop other things happening. So what sort of items do you think, if you're drawing a house, when you first start drawing a house, what might be the first thing that you'd ever pin?
Walls?
Yeah, yeah. External walls, we would probably, as soon as you've set your building out, you'd probably pin those, because you've usually set it out in terms of the shape of the building and volume of the building, and it might also be set out to the size restrictions of the block. So if you accidentally dragged it and you didn't know during the design process, you could get on site and not fit. You know, your site's so restrictive, you know, you're building to the boundary and you've got a metre setback on the other side. It's not going to be hard in a drawing to accidentally drag something. So we usually, once we've got those initial walls pinned, dimension them, they can't sort of change. We don't want to over pin things though, because if like some people just pin everything as they go, but you know, usually in the design process we're changing things as we go, and you start having to unpin pins that are pinning something else, and it just becomes like a real web of pins to sort of try to manipulate the model. So that's the pins. Move, the copy tool next to the move tool literally does a copy of something. So if I wanted to copy this rectangle, I could select the whole rectangle using my window selection. I could have to unpin it, in my case, and say copy, grab a corner like we did with the move, or grab a spot that we want to copy it from, and it's a copy. So instead of a move, it's actually creating a copy of that and moving it to a designated place. And what you might have noticed with that copy tool, again, it can be constrained, so it can just be horizontal or vertical, and also we can do multiple copies. So that means that when we drop it somewhere, you can drop it again and again and again. You don't have to go back to the original item that you're copying to grab it again. Rotate tool is the little arrow that's in a circle, showing sort of a rotation. Now the rotation is a little bit hard to get your head around. I find some people struggle with that a little bit because it's got a couple of elements. So I'm just going to pick one of my lines to show you with, and I'm going to hit the rotate button. And the first thing that comes up in this rotate is a center node. So that little blue dot that's in the middle. And what that is the placement point for the central axis. So that's where it's going to be rotated. However, I might not want it to be rotated on the center axis. I might want it to be rotated off the end. So in your options bars, you'll see a center of rotation place button. So what that place button does is allows me to grab that node and place it at a different position on the item that's selected. So wherever I hit that item, if I hit the end point, I'll get a snap and I'll say that's where I want it placed now, and you'll see the node there. Now you used to be able to, and you still can, we didn't used to have this placement button. You used to have to click on it and drag the button holding your left cursor down, which you can still do. Okay. Now the next thing that you'll see is that I've placed it towards the end of this line, and I'll put it right on the end actually. Let me just use the place, it's a bit more accurate. Grab the end point snap. The next thing is like a lever. So this little bit that's off, it's like a little lever, or maybe it's a crowbar or something if you imagine it like that. So we're going to put it into at one position and then use it to lever around that axis at a certain angle. So we can place it straight out and click, and then as we move it's starting to rotate the object. So you'll see a dashed blue line showing you where it goes, and also shows you some degree there. So if I wanted to take it to 90, I could wait till I see the 90, or I could type in 90 and enter, and it just rotates it up by 90. So with the rotate, we've also got disjoin, and we've also got a copy. So if it's going to be creating a copy at that 90 degrees, a second line, keeping the first one and copying up in a rotated sort of manner, we can use that as well. And we can also type the angle in here of rotation. There's a few things there. So the rotate is a bit complex, it's got lots of little bits to it. So if we move along keep moving along the bottom row there, the next one is the trim extend to corner, TR. That's one we use all the time, TR, trim to corner. So what the trim tool does is allows us to actually join corners. So on my little sketch here, if I've got this rectangle that I want to join this corner around here, I can hit that trim, hit the end of this one and the end of this one, and it joins. If I wanted to create a join from that point to that point, same thing. One there and one there. So you can see it starts to show you where it's going to go, and around it goes. Again with this one there and there. So we've got lots of corners in buildings that need to be connected, so that's why we use it a lot, TR. And the next two little ones that are along the bottom row, they become a bit smaller in icon, are the trim extend single element and the trim extend multiple element, which are quite similar, but instead of them coming to a corner, if we want a line to sort of tee up to another line, that's the one we would use. So let's say if I want this line here to come all the way up and just join that line as a T, I could hit that trim. I'd say this is the line I want to touch it on, so I need to give it the end point, and this is the line that I want to take up there. Okay. So up it goes and stops up there. So you need an end point to show the wall where it's going, or line. So if I wanted this line on my drawing here to come down and be on this line, I could say that's where I want it, and it's you that I want down there. Okay. We can go through other lines. So same thing, if I said, no, actually I want you to come right down to this line, that's the line I want it, and it's you that I want down there. Okay. So the multiple just allows us to hit a line and then say I want you, you and you all to come to that point. Okay, so multiple lines to the same point. So So we're just looking at what the icons mean at this stage. Don't worry too much if you sort of think, oh, that didn't work or that was a bit weird. We're going to be using these tools from today onwards for the rest of the time that we're here, okay, and beyond. These are all our basic commands, drawing commands and modify commands that are with us forever. So there's a couple more large ones above the rotate and the trim extend, which are both the same command but just using different principles, and they're both mirror commands. So one is mirror pick an axis that's already on our drawing. So it's just basically making a copy, but instead of it copying it across the page, it flips it across an object. So a mirror image of that object. And if we don't have something drawn out, a drawing that we want it to mirror around, the next one is that we get to draw an axis. So we go pick the object, I'm going to sketch an imaginary axis here, and it's going to flip it over that. Okay? Because sometimes we might say, like, in this classroom, if I was drawing this classroom up and I'd drawn up this row of computers here, to make them appear on the drawing here, I could do a mirror, select all these and the chairs. This is my mirror line. I've got a desk there, so I could pick that, it would flip them all and they'd be there. Okay? But if I wanted them to be here, if I flipped them here, they'd be here, not here. So the imaginary line I could draw here, so it flips it out a bit. Does that make sense? So it's a mirror image, like this room is, yeah, those two desks are just mirrors. Alright? So the mirror is quite handy because when you think of that, everything from one object can be mirrored to make 2 desks. Then you could mirror it to make 4. And then you mirror those 4 and you make 8 all of a sudden. So you do, even though you might think, oh, it's not something we'll use, you use it all the time. In a building, I suppose, one of the things that I use mirroring for all the time is downpipes. If you've got quite a rectangular building, you put your downpipes, work out your spacing, your downpipes on one side of the building. I pick all those downpipes, pick the ridge of the building, halfway in between the building, and mirror all the downpipes to the other side they're drawn. Okay? Otherwise, I've got to work it all out for the other side and get the spacing right. Doesn't work with every house because we've got different things, but the basic sort of function of that. So spend a little bit of time now just drawing some more lines, trying to, use some of those commands. We won't go through the split and the scale and array yet. We'll wait till a little bit longer to go through those, but get your head around those, and I'll come around and help people if you're having any trouble with any of them. Just start feeling comfortable, and delete your lines and start again if you want to draw. Remember using your select tool, having a look at your filter tool if you don't want to delete all your views, checking none and just picking the lines and deleting those. Starting to draw a few more lines. So let's have a look at drawing some walls now. So we've got the basic drawing tools. So the way we can draw and the way we can modify what we've drawn, we know where things are at now. One of the modify buttons I didn't go through is this red cross here. It's just the delete. I've never used that one in my life. Even though I've deleted multiple elements, I just tend to use the delete on the keyboard. Select an item and then just hit delete on your keyboard. It's a bit bigger, easier to find than finding that one. And the shortcut isn't really a shortcut because it's 2 commands, DE. So what are you going to do? Press delete or press DE. So if we go to the architecture tab now, we stay in our ground floor. Within that workspace that you've got there, if you just clean it all up. So delete all your lines and things that you've done, and we'll start with this clean workspace. And we'll have a look at sort of these building elements, and in particular the wall tool. So the wall button is a split button, and I mentioned what that was last week, meaning the top half is by default an architecture wall, because I can understand that icon. The bottom half splits it open into a couple of different options. We'll probably always use the architecture wall, so we don't necessarily need to use it as a split button. We can just hit the top. But as we click that, we sort of started to actually draw a wall. Okay, well, it's just about to draw a wall, but what type of wall is it going to do, and what height is the wall, and what do we want to do with the wall? This is the part, I suppose, that starts to get a bit more complex because we're drawing in a 3D sense, but we're looking at a 2D view. So some of the things that we need to start to look at is look at the properties of the wall. So if you have a look at your properties palette, the first wall that you've picked has come up as a basic wall double brick 270 by default. Is that what will come up with yours? Yep. So to change that basic, Revit gives us some basic walls to get us started. To have a look at all the wall types that we've got in this template, if we drop under the properties, if we drop that little drop down arrowhead, you'll see all the basic wall types that we've been given. So let's just change this one to a brick veneer 250 timber. If we click on brick veneer 250 timber, we've changed it to a different wall type from the default that was given to us. Okay. Now, some of the things that we've been given in terms of controlling the wall are some what's known as constraints. So constraints are where the wall is going to be drawn, whether it sits on this ground floor plane that we're drawing on, because we're in a ground floor view. Okay, so by default, the base of the wall is always going to sit on the view that we're drawing on. So we're on the ground floor at the moment. So if we start to draw at the bottom of the wall, we'll sit on the ground floor. But I can actually offset that. So see in the properties, it says that it's drawing it on the ground floor. But if I want to make it 10 mil into the ground floor, I could add minus 10 mil, and it would put it into the floor. Or I could actually float it off the floor if I want by going up. So we can change the offset. We can also change whereabouts we're drawing it by picking a different level, where the base is going to be drawn. But down further, we can actually connect it to a top height by using some different levels in our drawing as well. So even though we're going to be drawing it like we did with the lines, we're going to give it the length. We need to decide pretty quickly what the height is going to be in 3D. So a way to control that, so at the moment the top constraint says unconnected, so it's not going to be connected to a level as such. It's just going to be 8 meters high. The unconnected height is 8 meters there by default. Okay. If we just go into our project browser and go to our east elevation, you'll notice that the architectural template has set up 2 levels for us. One being the ground floor, which is what it's using on that ground floor view as our base constraint, and the second being a level 1 at 4 meters. So if I wanted to say, well, I'm going to be drawing this house up and the wall height, it's a 1-story house and the wall height's going to be 3 meters. We're going to have about a 3 meter ceiling type thing. What I would do is change that level 1 to a 3 meter height. So then all of a sudden our top constraint could be the wall height. Okay, I don't have to offset it, down or less. So we've got that. So what we could also do is start the ground floor, or change the name of the ground floor to finish floor level, FFL. And we could also change level 1 to finish ceiling level. So over in our floor plans now, instead of having level 1 and ground floor, we've got finished floor level and finished ceiling level. Notice how it's changed over in our browser. So that was that option that said, would you like to change this name? Yes, I clicked. If you click no, you got two different separate names, which there's reasons for those. So why I'm sort of introducing these levels is they're really important to control our 3D view when we're drawing in a 2D workspace. Now, one of the things that you might also notice in your project browser is there's a category floor plans. There's also a ceiling plans category. And ceiling plans and floor plans follow the same names because they're looking at the same level. So the difference between a floor plan is the camera that's put at 1200 is looking from that camera height at 1200 to the ground or that level. A ceiling plan, the camera is just twisted up, looking up. So they're using the same names because it's actually looking at the same level of plan. So to save people freaking out and thinking they've drawn nothing, what I'd suggest you do is minimize ceiling plans. Just get into the habit of doing that. Because often you might be drawing lots of things in your finished floor plan, so you finish floor level, and then you quickly just go to your finished floor level. You might be in another view and you go over here, you go, I'm going to click on my finished floor level, and you've got nothing because it's actually, you've clicked in the ceiling plan finished floor, and I get you, I've just drawn all this stuff and I can't see anything, it's all gone. So I tend to just minimize that, or tell you to minimize that so you don't see it, because we won't be working on too many ceiling plans in this class. So once we've set some levels up, we can go back to our project on the finished floor level. So use your tabs just to go back to that finished floor level. We'll pick a wall again, and we'll make sure that it's the brick veneer 250. And instead of keeping it as unconnected now, let's change it to go to the finished ceiling level in that top constraint section. So we've got a 250 thick brick veneer wall that's going to start at our finished floor level, which is the view that we're in, and it's going to go up to the finished ceiling level, which was the 3 meter height we'd set in the elevation. And what you'll notice on your options bar is where I've changed those options in my properties, you've got the option to do it in your option bar as well. So there's two places where you can do the same sorts of things. So the height can be up to finished ceiling level here. I could also change it to the unconnected there if I wanted, etc. And the next option is location line. The tick box after that is the chain. So we know now what the chain is. So we're going to draw the wall in the same fashion chain, so we don't have to pick another start point for the end of the wall. And location line means where I'm actually drawing the wall, because now we're not drawing a line, we're drawing a 250 thick wall. Which side of the wall, or are we doing it from the center when we touch the screen? So that'll become more obvious as we start to draw it. So let's just draw one wall from the left side of the screen and scroll across to the right. And if you zoom in, if we picked wall center line as our location line, can you see a dashed blue line going right through the middle there? And my cursor's in the middle of the center of the wall. That's what that means. So where we're clicking the wall, we're actually in the middle of the wall to place it. So that would make more sense if we thought about I'm drawing this 250 thick wall on the boundary of a property. Would I pick the centre to sit over the boundary? Am I going to hang the wall over to the next people's house? No. So what wall option might I choose that might be better for doing that?
Finish face exterior.
Yeah, so finish face exterior is going to be drawing the wall. See, my cursor's now on the top corner on the exterior. So I could actually pick the boundary and know that this wall's sitting just on that boundary, not half straddling it, half on and half off. So there's reasons why you will use both, that particular command and what you might choose to change it to, etc. as you're drawing. So there's not a right or wrong, it just depends on the situation that you're drawing it in. Okay, so let's just make ours finish face exterior for the point of this exercise as we do it. And I'll hit escape and start again. So finish face exterior. We'll click once, draw across, maybe let's use our 12 meters again. And we might go down by 19 meters. And back across, and let's just make it rectangular. Something like that. And then we can just hit our little 3D icon up in our quick access toolbar, little 3D one, and it'll quickly flick to your 3D view. And you'll see your little rectangular wall, series of walls. So did that work for everyone? So if I've decided that I want to change the height of these finish ceiling level now, the client says actually our budget's not going to stretch for 3 meter ceiling height now, it's going to probably only cover a 2.7. I could actually change that height in there to 2,700, and because I've constrained all the walls to that height, they're all going to drop down to that level. So if I had all of my walls unconnected, and had them at 3 meters, they wouldn't be changing when I change this height. Does that make sense? So that's sort of the power, I suppose, of setting up levels and using your levels to constrain your heights, because it gives us lots of reference throughout the drawing. So let's go back to our finished floor level view. And in this finished floor level view, let's draw some internal walls in this rectangular space. So this time we're going to pick the wall button, but instead of using brick veneer 250, we're going to just pick a 90 timber stud. And let's just draw a series of walls somewhere throughout the space. Doesn't have to be anything particular at this stage. But did you note that when you started drawing, it had picked up the base constraint and the top constraint that you were last using? Okay, so we didn't have to change those if we didn't want them to be any different for this. So we've got a couple of different walls set up inside, but we haven't really got any dimensions or anything for these sorts of rooms or spaces or whatever. So now what I want you to do in the 2D space is just click on one of your internal walls and notice how you start to get some dimensions coming up. So these dimensions are sort of just quick dimensions that pop up randomly, and if you click on a wall, it'll sort of give a dimension from one side of the wall to the next and the opposite side. So it's picking up on the first reference it can see. So I can see quite quickly that this wall is 4.2 from this wall. And this, if we call this a hallway, is 1220 wide. Okay. So if I wanted to change that using these, if I said actually I want this hall to be 1500, I can actually click into that dimension and type in 1500 and it will actually move. So these quick dimensions gives us the ability to draw quite quickly. So when we tend to draw outlines of buildings and internals in this program, we don't necessarily get 100% right. We just sketch the outline quickly, we sketch what's happening inside, and then we actually click on walls and make it more accurate using these quick dimensions. That's what it's there for. Okay, so it's not about thinking, oh, I need this wall 12 and then I need to make that one offset here, because it slows the process down. We just quickly sketch something up and then we go in and define all the spaces by using the dimensions afterwards. So if we decided that this dimension wasn't what we were looking for, so if I said, actually this wall here, I want it to be a certain distance from this wall here, I can actually grab this blue grip and place it on that wall there. So I can control what those temporary dimensions or quick dimensions are doing. So those little blue nodes are the placement spots, and we need to grab the grip and actually touch the inside, the center or the outside of the wall that we want to reference. So if you notice when you've sort of clicked the left cursor and hold that down, you can sort of bring it around and tap it on different surfaces of that wall, whether it's the outside, inside face or the center of the wall. And then just release your cursor and it'll drop it there. So I've made this one the center of this wall, and I could make it the center of this wall as well. So now that's a center to center dimension. Now the other thing to sort of note while we're sort of drawing at this stage is, have you got thick lines or thin lines turned on? So we should probably have thin lines turned on. And now because we've started drawing these walls, we should also start to have a look at down on the view control bar. The first little icon in next to the scale is like a little rectangle, and that's our detail level. So probably a medium detail is quite good to work with. So you'll actually start to see the hatching patterns of your walls rather than a big solid colour. Okay, so down in the quick access toolbar, the first rectangle that is there next to the one is to 100. So change that to a medium detail. All good so far? Yeah. Now, if we wanted to put a string of permanent dimensions on along the top, we can go to the Annotate tab, and in that Annotate tab that we were using earlier with the detail lines, over here we've got all the dimensions. So we want to do an align dimension, and the keyboard shortcut, which will be quite a handy one to remember, is DI for that dimension style. So just typing in DI will get up the aligned dimension. And when we want to put a dimension on this building, we want to again have a look at the option bar before we place the dimension, because we've got this wall center line coming up by default again. So that means, do I want to pick the center lines to dimension, or do I want to pick the faces of the wall? So I'm going to say wall faces, and I'm going to tap the outside and inside of that wall to dimension the thickness. I'm going to stretch my cursor across and click on every face of the wall and keep going right till I get to the end, and drag them up and click to place the whole string of dimension. And then I'll just escape twice to get myself out of the dimensions. And did everyone manage to get a string of dimensions along the top? Your drawing might be a bit different to mine, so you don't have to have all the same ones. Everyone managed to do that? Yeah. So rather than having those temporary dimensions on the drawing now, we've got some permanent ones, and they actually act the same as those temporary ones, but they're a bit more specific in terms of we've placed them where we want to place them. So now if I said for my drawing again, that passageway that I changed to 1500, I want to change that and change it back to 1200. You can see the temporary dimension that I moved is still referencing that area, but these permanent dimensions have also gone blue, which means I could type in here and change it in there. So it's quite a handy way to sort of get your building changed quite quickly again by putting some really quick dimensions around the building and using them to change some wall spacings. Now, with this series of, or this site, the longer side of my building, and I put some more rooms in there, another way to do these dimensions is to use the align dimension style, but with the pick option there. So I've still got wall faces selected, but the pick option says individual references. I want to do entire walls this time. Entire walls means that if I pick a wall, it will just give me the outside to the outside without me having to click the two faces. So it gives me the overall length of a wall, and I can place that one there. So there's my 19-meter wall length by just clicking once. So that was changing the pick to entire walls. So we still use the align dimension, DI, and then kept wall faces on, and then set entire wall. But the other clever thing with these dimensions is that with entire wall option turned on, I've now got another options button on the options bar that gives me the ability to do some auto dimensions, and I might say I just want to dimension all the intersecting walls along this wall length. So I'll say OK, and now when I click on this same wall, it's just given me all the dimensions for those walls that are intersecting. So instead of having to go along and pick the outside, inside, outside, inside, outside, I've just done it in one quick click. So the benefit of that now is with these couple of dimensions down this length of my building, if I wanted to change these wall lengths or room sizes, I can click on the wall that I want to move and change the dimension. So if that one's supposed to be 5 meters, there it is, okay? And if this space here is supposed to be 4 meters, I keep just moving my selection to the next wall and then moving the one behind. Okay, so it's just an easy way to sort of control that building. So have a little play with that for a few minutes. Hit the door button, we'll get a M single flush 8132134 by default. And if we drop that down, so hit that little arrowhead, all we've got is the M single flush family type with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different sizes. So I started to touch on families the other week. So this template, architectural template, has only started with one style or one family of doors, okay? But as we know, there's lots more door types than that, okay? So this is one family with 7 sizes to start with. So if we said we wanted to put a bifold door in this project, we've got to load another family, okay? So to load another family in, we've got 2 options. Within the door button, over here, can everyone see you've got load family? Okay. So when I'm in the door command and I see the load family, when we click on that, it goes to an Australian template of other family folders. Okay. So you get this downloaded as part of your install. So this is another way to check that you got everything when you're installing your Revit at home. If you go to load some more families in and it doesn't go to any folders there, then obviously you're missing some stuff. So in this Australian catalogue that's come in, you can see that you've got a door family. So you can change your view in here as well to a list, details or thumbnails as mine is. Thumbnails is quite handy because at this stage you might not understand what all the names of different doors and windows are, so you get a little picture or a thumbnail of it. So if we hit the door folder, you'll see that all of these other family of doors can be loaded into the project. So I just suggested we might put a bifold door. Let's put a bifold 4 panel in the Australian one, with Australian in brackets. So if I click on that one and say open, it's now loaded in 1, 2, 3, 4 sizes of bifold doors, and it's still got the 7. So that's how we start to load additional content into this project. Okay, why do you think they only give us one set of doors to start with in the template? Any guesses? So, yeah, well, it's to do with keeping it simple. They don't know what sort of building you're going to draw. So if they give you every door that you're never going to use, your project file is all of a sudden really big. So it keeps the weight or the size of your file down a little bit by keeping it a bit slimmer. So if you were at work somewhere that had a template set up ready for a single story house, it would probably have all the typical doors and windows for that particular project loaded in. You wouldn't be loading them in as you go, okay? So now we've got some bifold doors and we've got some single, but you might be thinking, well, what if my bifold door was 2.4 meters long? Okay, so we've got written how long they are and how high they are. So if we said we wanted one that was 2.4 instead of the 1830, we can change these. Okay, so we click on one of these ones And before we place it, we go edit type. So see the type, edit type there in the properties? Edit type brings us up to this type properties dialog box. And in the type properties, what we need to do if we're sort of customizing a family or changing some sizes and making an additional one is decide, am I going to need this door size in my project or aren't I? And so the option is, do I duplicate it and create a copy of the old one and now make another new size, or do I just rename it and override this one? So if you've already used it in a project and you just said rename and change the size, everywhere where it is in your project, the size will change because you're using the same door. So I tend to get into the habit of actually duplicating at your stage, just because it makes it a bit easier to remember. Give it a unique name in terms of, name it what it's going to be now. So we're going to change the 1830 to 2400, and we'll keep the same height and say OK. And we haven't changed the height yet, we've only changed the name. So now we need to actually find the height here in the dimensions, the width, and change that to 2400 and say OK. And now we're ready to place this newly sized bifold door. So notice my cursor has a circle with a cross through it, but as I actually hover onto the building, you'll see the bifold door start to appear. So the reason for that is that this family, being a door family, must be hosted by a wall. I can't just drop it out in space and think I'm going to use that later. It's hosted. So it's exactly the same as a real door can't be put into a wall until there's a wall there. Okay? So it can't be part of the building unless the wall's built. So we place it on the building, wherever we want it, just place it somewhere. And depending on which side we want it on the wall, you'll see it flick in or out. Okay? Depending on where the cursor is. So if you place that somewhere, you'll notice that, and hit escape a couple of times, when I click on it, or select it again, you can notice that it's got some little arrows next to it as well, here. So that flips it from one side to the other, or turns it round as well. So we don't have to worry too much when we're placing doors initially, because we can change them afterwards. But if we go back now and just pick our single flush door, so hit escape, hit your door, and pick one of the single flush doors. When you place these ones on, if you hit your space bar, swings it from left to right. Okay, and the cursor, depending on which side we want it to. So I might say I'll place that one there. Okay, escape.
Is there a way to select the centre of a wall or a centre of a corner with that annotation?
No, but you'll use you'll use the temporary dimensions for that. So when you're putting a new door in, I just put another one here. Can you see the temporary dimensions? They'll snap to the centre, so there's even dimensions both sides. Like you'll actually, if you go quite close to the centre, you can get the dimensions right in the middle. Yep, like it will sort of almost snap to it. You don't have to wiggle too much. Yep. And there is a way then afterwards to use our dimension tool to dimension the centres of the windows to the ends of the walls, and click a centre and it'll spread them evenly along the wall, which we'll do it in an exercise that's coming up. So notice that it cuts the wall out for the opening as well with a door, and it does the same with windows as well. So it's placing these doors and cutting out the wall and creating the opening at the same time. So people that have used AutoCAD before probably realise that in is quite a big time saver, because AutoCAD, you place a door in, then you've got to trim the wall, change the hatching in the gap. This does it automatically. So let's place some windows now as well, just so you see how they work. So we'll hit the window button, and the only family that's loaded is fixed. So again, we can go to the load family button. Now I mentioned before, when we're in the door family, we can go to this load family, and when we're in the window, we can go to this load family. Now, one of the things that you will probably make the mistake of is, when I'm in this specific tool, i.e. I'm in a window now, I can't open other family types. So if I said I want to go back to my doors now, and I'm going to load in another door type, I thought, oh yeah, while I'm here, I might just grab a single timbered frame door and say open. I'll get a warning that says some of the family files you select cannot be loaded. And that's because I'm in the window tool trying to load a door. So I'm trying to load a family that's not actually part of this window family. Okay? So the only thing that I can load while I'm in a window, while I'm in the window command, hit window, is the window folder down the bottom. So lots of different types of windows there again. Some of them have multiple sizes that will come up in specific dialog boxes as well, depending on which one you picked. And then we can place some windows in randomly. Don't worry too much about this drawing, it's just a bit of a play at this stage. But if I want to, thinking about this project, I said, I want to go in and just load some doors and some windows and maybe some furniture. I can actually go to the Insert tab, and it gives me a Load Family button too. So because I'm not in a door or window tool, I've just gone to a separate Insert tab. This Load Family button allows me to load any family from any folder that I want. Okay, so everyone might make that mistake and get the dialog box up, and it's one of the things a lot of students will go, oh, I just won't let me load these doors. I'll say, what command are you in? Okay, so if you're in a specific command, you can only load those types of families. If you want to load any family, you go to the Insert tab. Okay. So have a little look at your 3D model now. Orbit around it, practice your orbiting and zooming and panning and those sorts of things we did last week. And within this 3D model, if we wanted to make sure that all of the window head heights lined up at a certain height, we said we actually want them all 2.4 meters high. I could select the entire model by using our selection window or crossing window. Go to the filter tool, check none, just check the windows, apply an OK. So just my windows are selected in this model now. And in the properties of these windows that are selected, I can scroll down and I've got a head height measurement. So if I want to change all those to 2.4 high, I can do it in there and they all change. So when you change anything over here in this properties tab, over here on the left, anything that I change in here, you'll see that there's an apply button. you don't have to hit the apply button anymore. I think in 2018 they changed that. As soon as I type something in and my cursor leaves the properties back into my workspace, it's exactly the same as pressing the apply. Okay, so I might type a number in here. I don't have to go apply and then go back to my workspace and just drag my cursor over and that'll be active. So put some more doors and windows, load some different things in, doors and windows, and maybe draw some other walls if you're thinking you don't like the shape of your building. We'll just use the last 20 minutes just to sort of, just see if you can practice some of those commands. Use the move, use the copy, try to break it. See how many warnings you can get coming up. Read the warnings, see if you understand them or not.